Imposter syndrome. You've all heard about it. It's that nagging voice in your head telling you you're not good enough. In this episode, I'll go through the different phases in my life where that crazy voice tortured me and kind of kept me company too. I'm still learning how to deal with this. Hi, I'm Nadia, and you're listening to Scripted Unscripted, a podcast where I talk about my personal experience as a writer trying to make it and not always succeeding. Each episode covers big life concepts through small stories from my day-to-day. Sometimes my friends come to visit and we get to have a conversation about all of it. But no matter what, Scripted Unscripted is a way for me to share with you the joy and the pain of trying to live a fulfilling life. So let's get to it. You suck. Okay. Another way to put this is a trendy phrase called imposter syndrome. This is basically a feeling of inadequacy or self-doubt, no matter how many achievements you've got. As a young writer, I thought I had it because I didn't have enough experience, and also I wasn't making any money at it. But now I'm 40. I've got 2 decades of words on a page and produce scripts on the screen, and I make money doing it. But it hasn't gone away. You'd think it would, but it hasn't. No, that voice in my head that tells me that I suck is still there, and it's still loud. It just somehow got smarter, and I guess it has a better vocabulary now. Like once, I had a short film inside an anthology series that got nominated for an international Emmy. And I imagined what it would be like to win an actual Emmy award. I fantasized about walking up on stage and not tripping on the high heels that I was wearing. And then I adjusted my fantasy a little because maybe I won't wear any high heels. Anyway, I get up to the podium. I start my speech. It probably goes with, "Oh, I'd like to thank my producers," or whatever. And a small voice in my head starts taking over. "You're one short film among many. What makes you think you had anything to do with this accolade, even if you did win it? Which is a long shot." Damn it. The voice inside my head doesn't even let me fantasize. Most of the time, the voice in my head is my own. But sometimes it can sound like one of the many well-meaning aunties who say many things on many occasions. Is that what you're going to wear? These people are professionals and artists. Nobody's going to take you seriously like that. Come, we'll do our hair together. What I didn't realize is how many people shared this with me. People who are just starting out in their careers, sure, but also those that have been in it for longer than I have, and everybody in between. Sometimes I admire someone's work and think about how good they are at what they do. Part of me wishes that I was like them, and then they confide in me about how they don't belong or that they're not good enough. And I'm always surprised. Like, if they don't think that, then maybe I'm not as bad as I think I am. So I figured it would be a good thing if we talked about it more. And I don't mean like those inspirational speeches or motivational speakers touting positivity and blah, blah, blah. No, I mean real talk. Maybe if you hear what I've gone through, or what I'm going through still, you can see that it's normal, and together we can come up with some kind of way to survive that damn voice in our heads. Or maybe I'm just doing this all for me. I don't know. Because it helps to share it and not feel so crazy all the time or alone. Even as I'm talking to you right now, I'm thinking, who the hell am I to tell you any of this? Damn it, there's the voice again. Go away, we're doing a podcast. What makes you think you're good enough to be doing a podcast episode to begin with? I said shut up, I'm busy, I have a producer, she's recording me. Who do you think you are? Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. Please shut up. Well, actually, that's a good question. Who do I think I am? All right. Here's who I am. Times Square, 22 years old. There I was, the glam. Well, actually, no, I can't really start there. That wouldn't be fair. I guess it started when I was 6 years old, and we were on a plane headed for Boston, Massachusetts. My parents decided to go on a little trip to the U.S. A vacation, they said. We still lived there, by the way. I started school and didn't speak any English. It was wartime back home in Lebanon, so I hadn't actually been to school before then, at least not for long stretches of time. I quickly learned that not speaking the language makes people think you're dumb. And also they talk louder, and they talk at you.
Well, that's about right. Good morning, sweetheart.
I remember sitting in groups in round tables. The first grade teacher, Mrs. Levy, my very first hero, with her long skirts and buttoned laced-up collared shirts. She was giving instructions on the next task. There were pens and papers and construction materials, so I drew a face, and inside the brain part, I had different colors. I think they represented different emotional states. But I don't know, maybe I'm just making that up. Maybe I just liked the way they looked. When I was finished, I looked around, and it turns out the assignment was to draw the different seasons so we could build a handmade calendar. 6-year-old me could not believe it. She held back tears. Well, I held back tears. Now they must think you're so stupid. That's probably because you are stupid. Maybe that's when the voice was born. In that classroom where I really did feel out of place. Where I couldn't understand anything, not even the language. Bright side though, I did learn the language pretty quickly, and I did it through writing. It was just the right age where everyone was learning how to write, and I filled notebooks with my thoughts and stories. It was then that I got my first fan. She was this friendly adult who really cared about what I was writing. She sat next to me, her large frame looking kind of silly in those tiny chairs made for kids. But she focused on one of my notebooks and asked me loads of questions about my stories. She really was a huge fan. Many years later, I would learn that she was actually the school psychologist, and she was using that writing to figure out how I may or may not feel. Well, maybe she could have been a fan at the same time. You never know. And that's where I grew up, the U.S., in a suburb just outside of Boston. Anytime I felt out of place, which was often, I'd get to writing. There are 3 huge boxes of my filled-up notebooks somewhere in my parents' storage. Just after college, I decided that I was going to make it, whatever that means. So I headed to New York City, of course, on a $10 bus with 1 backpack. I stayed with a friend and got some part-time work on movie sets, which turned into full-time work on movie sets, which would teach me more than I could imagine. But something was missing. So there I was, 22 years old and standing in the middle of Times Square. It was early morning and the place was just waking up. The falafel carts with the big signs that read halal were opening up their fryers. The tourists were already walking down the street in those cheesy I Heart New York hats, looking up and inevitably running into someone. The bankers in their cheap suits walking to work, and the other kind in their expensive suits getting out of their fancy cars. A few yellow cabs, too. There are always yellow cabs. And there's always that faint noise of the subway rumbling just underneath the concrete of the sidewalk. New York City is the place where dreams come true. Or at least a place where you have big dreams. And I had one. I wanted to be a writer. A screenwriter, to be exact. That morning, I was in Times Square to attend my very first intro writing class. The building was big and glass and nondescript, and when I found the workshop space with a sweet and nerdy screenwriter at the helm, I had no idea that my life would change forever. I sat down, opened my notebook, and listened.
Welcome to intro class.
What do you have to say? I wrote that down in block letters, and I was scared as hell. I looked around the room. We were more than 15 people crammed around one table. And they were all ages, but I seemed to be the youngest. What do you have to say? An artistic-looking woman with bright red hair, tattoos, and lots of bracelets raised her hand. I forgot what she said, but I remember thinking, I have never dyed my hair. She must know what she's doing. What am I doing here? And then even worse than that, maybe I have nothing to say. Our first assignment was to write a few pages of an opening of a film, and each of us had to read those pages out loud and give each other feedback. I loved it. I loved working on other people's scripts, helping them look at their own work from a whole new angle. I loved being part of it with them. But when it was my turn, I was scared as hell. My film was about a guy who wakes up in a hospital and is met by these guardian angels who take away his memory. He has to find his way home and figure out what the hell he's doing. I guess in a lot of ways it was about me. Not because I'm a guy who's woken up in a hospital surrounded by guardian angels, but because I know what it feels like to feel lost and alone and just wanting to find home. Later in life, I would learn that this is the difference between facts and emotional truth. It's the unspoken that separates plot from theme. I will write countless stories in my lifetime, and they will all vary in characters and plot and whatever. But I bet if I dig really deep, they're all about finding home. I was the very last person to present my pages in class, and that was no accident. My voice was shaking when I read the opening scenes, but the feedback was so overwhelmingly positive, I couldn't believe that the voice of doubt had all but disappeared.
Nadia, come here for a second.
After class, the teacher came up to me and asked me to be part of a specialized master's program in his screenwriting studio in Brooklyn. Me?
Yeah, you.
This cannot be right. He assured me that it was.
I think you have potential.
But I tried to convince him otherwise. But I'm not qualified, I'm not ready, I'm not good enough, I cannot be with these other writers. Now the voice in my head was not actually in my head, it was talking out loud to him. Basically, it was saying, I suck and I don't belong. Here I was, on the sidewalk in the middle of Times Square, telling the man that would become my mentor that I couldn't do what he asked, and he said something that would change me.
I know you don't think you belong in this class.
But that's not up to you to decide.
I'm telling you that you belong.
Now it's your decision whether you want to or not whether you can or can't. When he walked away, I stood there on the sidewalk and thought about it. Maybe he was right. Maybe I should just take the leap. Maybe I could be a writer if... Hey, watch where you're going! The tourists are always looking up. Except I didn't say that to that poor tourist. I was lost in thought. I walked towards the subway, part excited and part terrified. I spent a year and a half working on my first feature film in that class, and that voice in my head never went away. I couldn't understand how I was sitting at the same table with these incredible writers. There must have been a mistake. It was around that time that I coined my silly little personal motto. On a bad day, I'm pretending to be an artist. On a good day, I'm closer to believing it. That's still my email signature, and it's still very true. That script was my first try at writing something real, or at least really long. So I guess it made sense to feel that way. When I was finished, I did a stage reading of it with real actors. Fade in. Exterior, blue sky, day. The clouds are fluffy and the sky is a crystal blue. As we travel through it, as if we are birds soaring thousands of feet in the air, more clouds come into play. It's a peaceful feeling. We dip down to see a bird's eye view of New York State, superimposed on the screen, New York. Then we dip down even further for a bird's eye view of the infamous New York City skyline, superimposed smash city to make the words New York City. A narrator speaks. Once upon a time. Okay, that's enough. Back to the podcast, please. Back then, which was almost 15 years ago now, my first script was so well received. I got praise and attention and encouragement. So you'd think that the voice would go away, or at least maybe get a little bit quieter.
Think they just like you?
Actually, it got louder.
Maybe they're just being polite.
All right,
okay,
what's
sure.
next?
People like
And
your
I had
stuff. You're not.
years of writer's block.
What's next?
Why?
Well, good for you.
I had
What's
gotten the
next? Why? Do you
validation
think
I
you
was
can keep
seeking,
doing this?
some sort of
You're gonna
approval
run
from
out of
people who
ideas.
mattered.
And again, what's next? Wasn't that great? You keep writing.
Even when the script was rejected from a prestigious fellowship, a friend of mine called me to tell me that he cried at the end of it,
Like when your mom told you that you wrote this really wonderful poem. But
and
she's
all
your
that
mom?
imagined judgment had just rolled
Does she
away
have
like a
to be
distant
something
whisper.
special?
So why? Why was this happening? Well, the voice inside our heads is so mean, so awful, it will find a way to attack you. In this case, mine was worried I would be a one-hit wonder. That because of this script, I had nothing left to say. I had said it all. Everything I was writing felt like the same thing over and over again. I know what you're thinking, and I thought it too. I was just starting out. Surely, after some success, things would get easier inside the crazy town that is my mind. Not exactly. I moved back to Lebanon in 2011 in search of, you guessed it, a home. I thought maybe the reason I wasn't writing was because I wasn't living my own truth. I stayed at my grandma's house in my mom's old room, and I was going to try it out for a year. This seems like some kind of weird pattern with my family. Like when we went on vacation to the US but never left. I stayed a bit longer than that in Lebanon. More than a decade, actually. I did so many things there. I opened and closed a successful writing academy called Fade In, where I built a methodology to help others battle the voice inside their heads and actually get shit done. I wrote another feature film, which was never made, but that reflects how I see Lebanon and myself in it. I produced the first 15-episode series on network television, before the streamers were even in town. And then I produced a 16-episode series called Awake, which is closer to my voice, but lacks some of the skill that it takes to write a series. It's currently a cult favorite and is being screened across the world. I kept writing and writing and coaching and writing and struggling and writing and succeeding and failing, and then something amazing happened. I call it a jump in my career. I had just written episodes with a very impressive American showrunner who was actually impressed by me. I had 3 produced series in the region, and I was being headhunted for all kinds of projects. Then, one of my original ideas got picked up by a major broadcaster, whom I will not name, but it was major. I'm confident. I'm on top of the world. I'm a good writer. Okay, maybe I'm even a great writer. Someone prove me otherwise. I have beaten the voice in my head. Welcome to the world, Nadia. You have conquered imposter syndrome. Congratulations. There should be an Emmy Award for something like that, because I was ready to take over the world. Then the broadcaster comes back to me. We love the idea. We just hate the first episode that you wrote. We'd like to hire someone else to do this show. Excuse, what? Say what? I remember I was in my son's room when I got that call. I was pacing around on his kitty cat rugs and holding back tears. I heard myself saying on the phone, it wasn't my best work. I was pregnant, you see, and I was overwhelmed, and it wasn't my best work. Actually, I was days away from giving birth when I handed in that episode. I wrote it, and I went to the hospital 2 days later. I remember thinking that I had lost my chance, my first real chance to be the writer I was meant to be. That night, my husband reminded me that I had a cult following for my first show, Awake, and it's the only Lebanese series that's aired across all the continents of the world. The world, he said. We were sitting in bed, and at that point, I was no longer holding back tears. They were flowing. He is the partner of a writer, so he knows when things get really bad, we cannot see our accomplishments. We can only recognize our failures. And that is the essence of imposter syndrome, isn't it? This isn't a failure, he told me. This is just business. I'm better than this, I swear. It was just the hardest time of my life. I can do better. I am better. But I didn't say that to him. I didn't have to. He could hear it, even though I wasn't speaking. I only just nodded my head. At some point, I let go of what had happened and moved on. But that voice in my head was growing more confident, and now it was feeding on these new experiences. So what can I do? What could I do? Well, I had 2 choices. The first one is one of my favorite scenes from the series called The Offer. It's about Mario Puzo's writing of The Godfather. He wrote the book, but this was his first screenplay. In this scene, he's sitting on a floating swan in a swimming pool while eating lasagna and smoking a cigar. He's crippled by his own self-doubt, but when the producer confronts him, Mario breaks down and admits that he can't do it and he'll never be able to write a screenplay. So my first choice is the swimming pool, and I like it there. I'm going to start there, but I can't be there forever. I allow myself a few days of this floating around. The other choice is to do what my mentor told me to do all those years ago. Decades ago, actually. I can't control what other people think of me, or what I think of me, honestly. But I can control the decisions I make in order to get what I want. And what I want is to be writing. I'm a mother now. He's 2, and I'm learning a lot from him. He reminds me that leading with joy is sometimes the only answer you need. When he's playing with Tupperwares next to some expensive toy that his grandparents gave him, or finger painting outside the lines, or jumping around and calling it dancing, I know that this is the secret to life. It's joy. So what if I don't belong? So what if I'm not good enough and nobody likes me? As long as I'm able to do what I love, mind you, I do have to make a living at whatever I can, but as long as I'm doing what I love, I'm succeeding. I gave a seminar once called Not Giving a Fuck, and it was all about joy. When I'm writing without thinking about external judgment, I enter a joy state. Others call it a flow state, but I think they're the same thing. So I do. I keep writing. I keep trying to enter the joy state. On the worst of days, I pretend to be good at it. And on the best of days, I actually am. But I'm happy either way, because it's all I've got. It's who I am, and it's who I have to be, I guess. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. It felt really good to share with you out there in podcast world. I'm going to continue to share stories on my experiences that made me a writer, a creative, and the all-around kooky human being that I am today. If this resonates with you, share it with your friends, and make sure to check out our socials. Oh, and bonus! For this episode, my producer got me to write a sci-fi story about a grandpa and mlucheye. I don't know where it came from, but it was really fun. Scripted Unscripted is brought to you by CMS, yours truly Nadia, and my lovely producer Hind.